Good morning. Today, our college will acknowledge the Yagara and Turrbal peoples of the Yagara Nation as the traditional owners of these Indurupilli lands upon which our splendid school sits. I am very proud of my college. Like schools across Australia, you have embraced the Indigenous history of your seat of learning. You regularly acknowledge its traditional custodians and elders. You fly the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander flags. You treat your Indigenous colleagues as your schoolmates, and you do your best to abjure racism and prejudice. You honour their cultures, and I think you know they are your heritage too, as Australians. This is my college. I spent the best 5 years of my life here. I want to acknowledge my elders of St. Peters, past and present, my great teachers, Mr. Michael Selleck, with whom I read modern history, and Mrs. Jane Greenwood, with whom I read English. My pastors, Pastor Leo Dakey, Pastor John Kleinig, and Pastor Reinhard Mayer. My school leaders, my namesake, Mr. Noel Volk, Mr. Robin Kleinschmidt, and of course, the man after whom this centre is named, Dr. Carson Dron. Let me honour and express my gratitude and love for the great things my old headmaster gave to all of us who called this our home. Dr. Dron was a force of nature, the kind of innovator who defined an educational institution and whose imprint on the lives of those of us schooled under his rule could never fade or be forgotten. I can only thank God for the blessings these, my St. Peter's elders, bestowed upon us. It is 40 years since I left in 1982. I was slow to return, but my spirit never left here. So much has changed, and yet so much is so familiar. The silence in the chapel, thinking about my family back home. Downstairs at Low House with Mr. Selleck's spirit, at the end of a lesson on Thus Spake Zarathustra, and he lets us rest our heads on the desk with Seneca's injunction that we meditate on the brevity of life. It could have been yesterday when I was a scholar here. The school community I joined as a 13-year-old and farewelled after my 17th year is one of 4 most important to me. We are all members of many diverse communities. We have multiple identities. We don't have a single identity. Our identities are multi-layered, and they crisscross and overlap the delusion of singular identity is probably the most wrong-headed idea in the modern world. Rather than decry the problem of identity politics as a problem of identity per se, because identity is important to everyone, we should rather understand we have identities plural that bond us with those close to us and bridge us with those who may otherwise be strangers. Let me tell you about my 4 communities. This photograph is of me showing off a batik I produced in Mrs. Elvery's class when the Arts Centre was brand new and I was in Year 8. I didn't know at the time, but I was making a statement about who I was. The black and white cockatoos are the totems of my Gubi Imidar people, Murar and Wandar, and the map is my homeland. The crosses mark the old and new missions of Hopevale. It was my statement about land, culture, and faith. I am firstly Gubi Imidar and Gubi Yalanji from Hopevale and Wujal Wujal. I was raised to follow our culture and honour my elders and to care for our heritage. I came to this college keenly aware and confident in my Aboriginal identity. Secondly, I'm part of a wider community of Pama, Indigenous peoples of Cape York. After studying history and law at Sydney University, the cause of my Cape York people became the reason for my public life and leadership. I seek better prospects for our Pama, and I want for our children to have the social, cultural, economic, and political capabilities so that they can choose lives they have reason to value and take a fair place in their own country. Thirdly, I came here as a Lutheran. I knew from my earliest childhood I was part of a Christian community that connected my people to Lutherans all over the world, starting with Martin Luther's Reformation in 1517 Germany. The Lutheran Church is central to me and my Imidar and Yalanji people. It is who I am. Fourthly, this school became my community. I am so very pleased my daughter Nijali dragged my reluctant son, Mulumbo, here from our sister school, Good Shepherd. This is my spiritual home, and I am sure it will become theirs too, as I expect it will become for all of you. Let me speak of the great English philosopher Edmund Burke's brilliant explanation of the meaning of society and apply it to these communities of which we are members, each in unique ways. Burke's transgenerational view of society holds that our ancestors are part of us, because we love and honour them for the good things they left us. And we want to bequeath to our future generations our heritage, our languages, our cultures, our traditions, and importantly, our environment in good stead. Society is the convocation of the ancestral dead, we the present living, and our as yet unborn. We can think of our college community in the same way. Our school is a transgenerational community of our elders past, teachers, pastors, janitors, cooks, groundspeople, boarding masters, and former students who made a home here. And you, the present students, and those who will join this community in the future. Like multi-layered identities, Edmund Burke's concept of the transgenerational society is a fundamental idea that should be central to our civic life in Australia. I refer to layered identities and the transgenerational society because I want to talk about what is Australia and who are the Australians. I think we're still somewhat uncertain and unresolved about the answer. There is an aspect of our story that remains tentative and unsettled. I have argued that Australia has three stories. The first is the story of its foundations, its 65,000-year-old continuously living culture of its Indigenous peoples. The second is the story of the British institutions which were built upon these foundations, transported from the United Kingdom to be the democratic heritage of all Australians. The third is the story of multicultural migration, which brought the cultural gifts of peoples from all over the planet, making us one of the most diverse and peaceful societies in the world. Indigenous foundations, British institutions, multicultural migration. Three Australian stories that answer the question, who are the Australians? We must bring these three stories together. These, our own stories, are indeed staring us in the face. They are our reality. We only need open our eyes and ears and hearts to them. Recognition and justice for the country's original peoples is necessary if we are to bring Australians, Indigenous, colonial and migrant, together. We needed to reconcile our troubled history. For too long the country avoided it through the fiction that the continent was never owned before European colonisation. Moreover, the founding of the Commonwealth was premised upon the myth that the country just magically appeared in 1788. And the only things relevant to Australia is what happened in the most recent 250 years. At the crux of our colonial legacy lay the question of land rights. Was this country terra nullius, a land without legal owners, as the law and policy of the Australian colonists insisted after 204 years before Mabo's case? On this day, 30 years ago, on 3 June 1992, the High Court of Australia discarded the lie of terra nullius. Australia was owned before British colonisation, and the title of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples survived the claim of the British Crown to the Australian continent. The High Court ruled that following the British invasion of Australia, the Indigenous peoples became subjects of the Crown, entitled to the protections of the law, which included the common law of England. It was this English common law that recognised the land rights of native peoples. This native title represented the intersection between the customary law of the Indigenous peoples and the customary law of England. Native title was the reconciliation between the law of the invaders and the law of the native peoples. Yesterday, Sir Gerard Brennan, Companion of the Order of Australia, Queen's Counsel, passed away aged 94 years. He wrote the leading judgment in the Mabo case as a Justice of the High Court. I urge, at some point, for all of you to read Justice Brennan's judgment in Mabo. I would say it's a duty for all Australians to do so. Justice Brennan was a Queenslander, and it was he who declared that it would be an unacceptable racial discrimination for the law of Australia to deny that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples owned their traditional homelands under their own laws and customs. Sir Gerard was one of Australia's greatest jurists and most revered judicial elder. His passing is a great sadness for his family's loss and gratitude on the part of the country for his service. The Mason High Court, of which he was a leading member, and the court of which he was Chief Justice, were among the finest in the common law world. These were courts of the highest calibre, and no Australian student of the law could be prouder of them. His judgments in a series of cases are justly famous and will endure for the ages. It is strangely fitting that he should pass on the eve of the 30th anniversary of his most astounding legal judgment in Mabo No. 2. A magisterial tour de force of impeccable legal history and justice. When he delivered on 3 June 1992 those immortal lines that the dispossession of the Aborigines underwrote the development of the nation, the dispossession of the Aborigines underwrote the development of the nation. He not only brought the country to the truth of its history, but to its very morality. Mabo is our most famous and important judicial ruling. Its ramifications in terms of land rights have been tectonic. But more than that, Mabo laid the foundations for us to move forward to reconciliation. Finally, after 200 years, Mabo recognised that this continent had been owned and occupied by Indigenous peoples since time immemorial. Mabo was a crucial cornerstone for reconciliation. A response to the 2017 Uluru Statement from the Heart will complete our Commonwealth. The new federal government, led by Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, has committed to taking the recognition of Indigenous Australians in the Constitution of Australia to a referendum of the Australian people in this term of Parliament. If we rise to the opportunity that now presents, our 3 Australian stories will become one. And even as we maintain our diverse individual and group identities, we will be able to speak in the first person plural. We. Even as we maintain our diverse individual and group identities, we will be able to speak in the first person plural. We, the Australian people. Thank you.